Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the British Library. My name is Maya Maricevic. I'm Director of Science Innovation here. Thank you for being here and braving the weather, the trains that are starting to have some difficulties and all of that. We really appreciate you being here. So tonight is a part of our running series of AI debates. We've done some of these before, and we are just going into our new series, this one being the first one, and we thought we'll start at home and talk about libraries and AI. I just want to also get to your attention the other events we are going in this series. So this is what we are here for today. If you want to come back here on 20th of February, we are going to be talking about creativity and AI. And as many of you might know, we're in the middle of consultation on copyright, so we would imagine that this is going to be quite a discussion. And then in March, we are going to talk about democracy and AI, a subject that we are coming back to and we discussed previously, but we think there is lots of new things to say. So that's probably all I have to say, apart from introducing our lovely chair that returns for these events, and we are very grateful, Timandra Harkness, author and comedian and radio host and broadcaster and many different things. She has some lovely books outside. Technology is Not the Problem is the latest one, so go and find it. Or listen to Timandra on Radio 4. Timandra, over to you.
Thank you very much, Maya. So yes, the way this evening will work, as you see, we have a panel of 5, all incredibly knowledgeable in this area, so we're very lucky. They're going to give us very brief introductions. So I will introduce them. They will speak for about 5 minutes each. And then I will pick up a few of the themes that they've raised, mainly to give them a chance to argue with each other. And then we will come out to the audience so that you can stick your oar in. Don't feel you have to pretend it's a question, as long as you keep it pithy. I'm quite happy for you to express an opinion. It's a debate, after all. On which note, I'm going to be using the yellow-red card system. I've warned the speakers about this. When I think they've got a minute left, I'll show them a yellow card. And if they're still talking when I think they should definitely have stopped, they get a red card, which means they can finish the sentence and stop. I'm telling you this because I am prepared to use this on the audience. If anyone in the audience suddenly decides we need to hear an entire thesis, which they have prepared, we don't. But thanks anyway. No, we will. I will come out to you. I will get a few points at a time, bring it back to the panel to respond, so that we should get a bit of an actual discussion going. They will get the last word, obviously, because some of them have travelled a very long way to be here, as you will find out. And then we will go out. There will be a pay bar, so we can do the proper discussion afterwards in the bar, as is traditional. So I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they're going to speak. We are starting, as Maya said at home, with Dr. Mia Ridge, who is the British Library's digital curator for Western Heritage Collections. She's also part of the digital research team and co-investigator on Living with Machines, which was a 5-year research project, and co-curated the Living with Machines exhibition with Leeds museums and galleries. So she can give us the view from the British Library. Next, we will go to Rob Cawston. So they have actually seated themselves slightly in order, who's currently the Director of Digital and Service Transformation at the National Library of Scotland. So very inclusive and international, you see. He's got 2 decades experience managing digital strategy in the arts and culture sector. So he's previously managed digital programmes at the Scottish Government, the National Museum Scotland, the Royal Institution, BAFTA, and Chatham House. So just to remind you, Rob, everything's on the record here.
Okay,
so
I'll write that down.
Next, we're going to hear from Lacey Bryant, who is the president of the Chartered Institute of Library Professionals. So very much an overview of the sector, I hope. Also visiting professor in knowledge and information mobilisation at Manchester Metropolitan University. I like the idea of mobilising information. Yeah. Recently retired from a role as Chief Knowledge Officer for the NHS in England, and I'm afraid has such a long CV of past involvement in information, healthcare, AI, machine learning, that would take up your entire 5 minutes, so I'm not going to read it all out. Next, we have Svein Arne Brygfjeld, who is Special Advisor on AI at the National Library of Norway. So I suspect has travelled further to be here than anybody else, except perhaps the people in the audience who came with him from Norway, who has been involved with the National Library of Norway for a long time and with digital strategies for a long time. Previously was leading the development of the National Library of Norway Digital Library, led the National Library of Norway AI Lab, and currently engaged in the AI community work within A14 LAM. I'm afraid I don't know what that is. You can tell us if you like. And now works on as a special advisor for AI for the National Librarian in Norway. So I think you get the general idea. And finally, we're going to hear from Dr. Tom Chatfield, who is a British author and tech philosopher. His most recent book, which I recommend, is Wise Animals, which is an exploration of the co-evolution of humans with technology. But he has many other books out. His recent work includes designing and presenting The Economist's Critical Thinking and Understanding AI business courses, which I should probably declare an interest because he interviewed me and I'm in it. But yes, many other books, and is on the advisory board here at the British Library. So I hope we'll be able to give us a wide philosophical overview of knowledge, libraries, humans, technology, and what it all means. And then we can get stuck in. So, with no more to do, over to you, Mia, for your roughly 5 minutes of everything about AI at the British Library. Off you go.
Well, 5 minutes isn't quite enough, but just to give you some sense of what the library's done in the past. But firstly, I'll just say that AI itself is not necessarily a useful term. Generally, what we're talking about is machine learning in various forms. Perhaps one day AI will truly be both artificial and intelligence in the kind of the movie sense where you wave your hands and amazing things happen. Mostly at the moment, it's statistics made really sexy. So well done to statisticians for making that happen. The British Library, like many libraries, and we'll hear from the other libraries as well, has worked with every sort of iteration of technology as they come to bear. So we've worked with many previous iterations of what now is called AI, the big data moment, the text and data mining moment, the deep learning, data science, and then finally AI over the past couple of decades in terms of different ways of exploring our collections and the kinds of utilitarian technologies that we use to make our collections more available, more usable, more accessible. So things like text transcription, layout detection, finding images on the page, that kind of thing. Around 2006, the library, us in digital research, realised that the breakthroughs that we were seeing in terms of machine learning models for image labelling and text transcription were really going to change how libraries worked. So all of a sudden you could search for a word or a phrase in manuscript pages, handwritten pages that had been digitised but not fully transcribed. You could do pattern matching to find handwritten text that matched a phrase that you were looking for. And that kind of transformational opportunity to change how we work meant that we really wanted to think about how this is going to change the work that librarians do, other library professionals, what it meant for our users, what it meant for people who don't use libraries, what it meant for creators and publishers as well. So we worked with the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK's Data Science and AI Institute, to make the Living with Machines project, which was a kind of meta-reflection on what living with machine learning was going to mean for us in libraries, but looking at the vast amount of text, maps, tables of information created during the 19th century as people got to grips with mechanisation in the home, in the workforce. So the kind of classic Luddite moment. And when the sort of vast economic transformation of the UK, people moved from the countries into majority living in cities, all these social and cultural transformations that happened as technologies were introduced into the 19th century. And we wanted to think about what it was going to be like to live through that in the 21st century. So Living with Machines was that kind of meta-reflection. And we took the lessons that we learnt from that process and all the previous collaborations and research projects, fed them into our draft ethical guidelines and a sort of draft AI strategy, thinking about as a library how we know what we say yes to and what we say no to, how we choose who we collaborate with, how we understand things like the environmental impact of machine learning and AI in terms of water usage, rare mineral mining, energy usage. And really, we kind of came to the conclusion that it's based on trust. Libraries are one of the few trusted institutions left in the world, and we value that trust. We also have relationships with publishers, with authors, with creators. We see everyone coming in through our doors, to our exhibitions, to our reading rooms, using our collections online. So thinking about trust in those many different facets was really important. And also thinking about respect, again, respecting the creators, respecting people whose lives are represented in our collections, respecting the ways in which people want to use those collections, thinking about are there kinds of uses that we wouldn't want our collections to be used, and do we have any say in that? And I think for people who've worked with open data, that's a really salient question. Like, is there anything that we can or should be saying no to in terms of machine learning and AI? And finally, we were thinking about value. So how do we deliver public value? How do we ensure that we experiment, but that we don't waste money doing stupid things? And for me, I am both a curator, but also, as a technologist, a requirements engineer underneath. So I'm always thinking about what's the real problem that you're trying to solve? Then is AI actually the right way to solve that problem? And are you equipped to solve that problem in that way? So it's finding the balance in terms of the money, the environmental impact, but also thinking about the people in our collections, the people who created those collections and continue to create things that we collect, the people using those collections, and library professionals.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mia. So, Rob, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mia. You touched on a lot of points that I'm probably going to touch on as well. So, National Library of Scotland, we're 100 years old this year, celebrating our centenary. And as part of that process, we've kind of been looking back on our organisation, and I went back to the Wayback Machine on the Internet Archive. It was 1996 that the first mention of digital library appeared on our website. So that's about, for a third of our life, we've been thinking about digital and how we fulfil our mission and purpose in a digital sense. There's obviously a lot of hype at the moment around AI. I mean, the 2 weeks leading up to this event, there's been a lot of news around AI. I think Keir Starmer referred to AI as the ultimate force for change and renewal in our nation. I'm probably on the slightly more sceptical side of that debate. But there's definitely a moment where libraries, as trusted sources of information, as Mia mentioned, need to really think carefully about our response and our approach to these new tools, or some tools that have been around for a while as well. At the National Library of Scotland, we've produced an AI statement. We spent a lot of time through last year really stepping back and thinking about, well, what does this mean? And one of the things that Mia touched on is the usefulness of that kind of catch-all term, artificial intelligence. We don't think that's useful necessarily. It's kind of a kind of catch-all hype term that we need to really unpack. So we would like to think about tools and automation tools. So as soon as you think about automation, you're thinking about the process that you want to automate, the value you want to get out of that process. But you can also think about who's running the process, who's accountable to that process, who might be harmed in that process, and who might benefit as well. So our AI statement isn't a plan. It's not going to say what we're exactly going to do, but it does set out our approach to the responsible adoption of artificial intelligence and tools. Part of that is being curious and staying curious. I think as libraries, we have a responsibility to look around, find out what's happening. Digital's been a part of how we do our work, and we've got a responsibility to stay up to date and see what's happening. It's also about being careful, though. So as a legal deposit library, we have to be careful about who and where our data, who uses our data, where it goes. Copyright's a big issue at the moment, and we just have to step through and keep that trust that we've got within our ecosystem. And Mia mentioned some of the people who are involved in that ecosystem. It's also about collaboration. We're not a tech organisation. We need to collaborate with people, whether that's academic institutions, whether that's private sector as well. We have been stepping through some small-scale pilots, thinking about how do we automate processes around metadata generation, how do we take our moving image archive and generate descriptive content or recognise the content in that archive as well. But our challenge next is, how do you scale up from that point? How do you actually recognise what's valuable and where to put what is sometimes limited time and resource?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rob. I'm not going to get to use my cards at all, am I? Nowhere near. Sue, tell us about the entire library sector.
Entire library sector. Well, I'm going to try and focus in and make some of this a bit real about using information. So on the plus side, AI is already enhancing solutions that help us with problems we have. So I've got a long background in healthcare. Let's just think about that for a minute. Healthcare is knowledge intensive. The evidence base, the information explosion, we talk about it all the time. It's said that the evidence base for science doubles now every 60 to 73 days. And in healthcare, it takes, you may pause, it takes 15 to 17 years to get robust evidence from research into everyday practice. So there are real problems that we have to solve, and of course machine learning and AI can help us. So just one tiny example of that, many researchers in lots of other fields, lots of fields in which librarians are working, are involved in systematic reviews of evidence. They take forever, and AI can really help. So there's a product, for example, I've looked at, it's called Pico Portal, and they use AI right the way through the process. So from right the way through from the point of sifting and filtering. So you might ask a question like, has it really randomized the people into the appropriate control trial? And it will show you, it'll answer your question. It will show you where in the text of the item it derives its answer. And then it will say, do you want to use that answer or not? You're in control as a human, and it goes right the way through to the writing up of a systematic review. So it's transparent, and at every stage of the process, humans have to take responsibility. What librarians call discovery systems. We're very good at language nobody understands. It's really helpful for sharing knowledge. But the way in which you look stuff up and find stuff. So a lot of AI, well, machine learning really is being used to help improve search and return more relevant results. So it's not a drain on the time of librarians to get around their heads around this. It's actually business critical. It's business critical if our businesses are going to succeed in our society and if we're going to stay up to date. And we need to know how to procure the stuff, how to specify the stuff, and how to help our organisations choose and implement it. So it's all about adding value. But actually AI is only one piece on the spectrum. And, I think it's like fusion cooking. You're going to see this lot come together in ways that are exciting and very different. So that was all the plus. On the downside, it's not very different from the printing press. AI is both awful and awesome. Gutenberg's invention widened access to information. That included spreading Kramer's theory of witchcraft, and many, many women died in appalling ways for centuries as a result. So these are not new challenges for us to deal with. I won't go into it in detail because I'm very frightened of that red card and I've got more things to say. But there's a paper just come out in Nature Medicine where researchers at New York University deliberately injected some misinformation into an AI database which has medical content. This generated 150,000 medical articles with 24 hours. It is cheap and easy to, and just have to only host harmful information. Human nature's civilization is very thin veneer. That's not a professional body comment, it's my personal review. It's a very thin veneer, and we have enormous harms can be achieved by this kind of poisoning of data. But the same team also used AI to come up with ways of combating it, and they leveraged biomedical knowledge graphs to cross-reference with large language model outputs. There are people here who understand all that much better than me. To screen out medical misinformation. And they argued that we all need to push for improved, explicit data governance and transparency, and that we all need to understand the risks of this stuff scraping data from the internet. So a couple more points, if I may. Right now, for librarians, there's a significant role in helping researchers, students, business people, lawyers, engineers, healthcare staff use the right tool for the right job. And across sectors, people have stepped up to it, and librarians are doing vast amounts of information skills training, and that includes out into public libraries algorithmic training, algorithmic literacy is at the heart of the professional knowledge and skills-based domain on literacy. We know we're the first country in the world to do that in our professional body. We've got to get people able to understand the risks around algorithms. In the NHS, we're doing a lot of that work collaboratively, and that kind of do once and share needs to be done across sectors. But there's nothing new about any of this. So if I take you back to the heavy plough, 1000 AD, it saved time, it vastly improved crop yields, and inevitably it drove changes in the scale of operation and ownership, patterns of ownership and capital. But skilled ploughmen emerged as the high human capital workers of their day. And a key lesson for any librarians, actually anyone who works at all in this room, is that innovation favours those who with the skills to work with the new technology. May I say something about copyright?
Yes.
Thank you. So CILIP has recently joined the Creative Rights in AI Coalition. Right now, it's a wild west out there. AI tools, just like the media, are hungry for content, and they're hoovering it up from everywhere they can go. And if you're in the field, it must be incredibly exciting, and it must be very, very easy to think that you're doing the right thing and building this wonderful tool, and not think that you're violating copyright legislation, which is intended to ensure that creators receive acknowledgement and payment. Now, librarians are worried, of course, about copyright and transparency, and we're going to have to address that as a society going forward. So we've just joined this rights coalition to press the government to push for an ethical approach to all this. But a key element of this is actually, that we're not going to get growth and innovation in either of these sets of industries, creative industries or tech industries, unless we start to play ball together. Because you can scoop up as much as you like, but in the end, the creators will get very fed up and these services will get very, very stale as they sit. So we need to start to grow up and have proper conversations which we can look towards sustainability and mutual best interest. So we're looking for a dynamic market around licensing content, requiring transparency and holding people to account. The Wild West, though, didn't stop because we sent a marshal into town. It was a very gradual process. It was influenced by economic growth, in which librarians play a key role in thriving societies, thriving businesses, thriving communities. It was influenced by technological advancement, by government policy, and we need proper discussions there, and also in cultural shifts. So there's a lot to do.
Okay, thank you very much. It's so nice to, as a change from like data is oil, to hear AI compared to the heavy plough. That's a new one on me. Right, Svein, Arne, bring us the view from Norway.
Thank you. Yeah, I come from a different library, and I feel somewhat crazy sitting here listening to you people claiming to think. I have got the feeling that we don't think, we just do. And we have done so for many years. We started off in 2005, for example, just deciding to digitize our collection. Not pieces, not parts, but the collection. Today we have digitized basically our printed part of the collection. So it's digital, it's there. And that is my starting point for the discussion about AI. So I assume that we have real digital libraries. If not, AI does not really make sense. Right? It must be digital. And being digital then, of course, AI has some positive effects. If you look at the internal workflows, for example, we know by experience, since we have an AI lab, which we have had for 6 years now, we know through experiments, through experience, that we can improve basically all the workflows that we have. We can do better, we can do more, we can have better quality, and we can have more satisfied people in our organization. We know that for a fact now. If you look at our services, why we are there as a library, we know that we can improve our services in many ways. And I think, well, for me, AI is basically about improving the services from the library. And what I really think is that AI is very different, because AI is able to lift our understanding of our collection from information to knowledge. And that is a major change, really a major change. And we have seen that in many examples in research now, that we have made discoveries based on machine learning that we couldn't do without the machine learning. Right? I met a guy at the Vatican from Milano the other day, and he told me that he was very engaged in AI in libraries because he hoped that there was some knowledge in there. Right? He really wanted to discover the knowledge hidden in the collection. I think that's beautiful. I hope it's true. And the last part that I would like to point at is that we as a library, since we don't think and just do, we also define our own place in society. And we do that by talking to the politicians, convincing them that we should get a role. And what we are convinced the politicians about now is that the National Library of Norway should be a model factory. We should provide the Norwegian society with large language models trained on Norwegian content for the Norwegian culture, the Norwegian languages, our way of living. We should not base everything on things made on the west coast of the US, because it's based on a slightly different culture, a very different language, and we want to be Norwegian, and we should be Norwegian. As a part of this, we work with the copyright holders. Right now, I'm waiting for the mandate from the government to go into formal negotiations with the right holders for literature and for newspapers, which should make us able to train the Norwegian language models on content in copyright. The government is willing to pay, and we hope we will see a result during spring on that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's all for now.
Well, that's a bit of a mic drop moment, isn't it? Well, I'm sure we're going to get that here because our government's really keen on AI, so I'm sure they'll be willing to fund that, won't they, for the British Library? You don't have to answer that right now. Okay, Tom, follow that, as they say.
I'll try and do some thinking. So I want to just kind of pull out 3 points in more general terms, hopefully drawing on what's been said. And the first one, I think, is that with generative AIs, what we have is a world of slop. I don't know if anyone's met Shrimp Jesus, who's on Facebook, or Donald Trump as Jesus, or just nice things about Trump in general. But we live in a very, very, very noisy world. And it's not just misinformation or disinformation, it's just noise. Because generative AI has reduced the cost of generating coherent images and words in the style of whatever to nothing. And this means, among many other things, that signals amid this noise are incredibly important. And the custodianship of, if you like, original, human-generated, handcrafted, world-oriented data is incredibly important, because generative AI is a beautifully powerful statistical engine, but its probabilistic, it's not deterministic. It gets unanchored from reality, it goes off on one. I've heard it said that it's a little bit like a politician in that it has an opinion about everything, an indirect relationship with the facts, and isn't that good at maths. So for libraries, as kind of custodians and experts on the origins, the provenance of information, its rootedness in the world, its history, this is a very, very important role. And it's very important to remember that the big tech companies are very bad at this stuff. They're not all-knowing geniuses. They're people who are very good at some things and often contemptuously bad of others, including anything to do often, not always, of course, with data custodianship and provenance. So libraries have a very, very important role here. And I think the second point, which speaks to the Norwegian example, which I think is so powerful, is just the very basic fact that the astonishing, truly astonishing thing about the latest generation of large language models, of speech models, of visual models, is that we can just interact with the world of data. Anything we can digitize, we can talk to. We can have a conversation about in natural language. I can say, okay, here's 15,000 hours of video. Please pull out all the interesting bits that are relevant to me. Here's all the newspapers from the last 100 years. Tell me what it was. I want to have a conversation with someone alive between 1920 and 1930 and explore their prejudices. These are unbelievably powerful tools if you have the digitized collection, the metadata and the knowledge of what that digitized connection is and isn't, because if there's shrimp Jesus in there, you're in trouble. And libraries can be part of the great facilitation of this. It's a huge opportunity. And again, one size doesn't fit all. The Western Anglophone corpus is different to the Norwegian language corpus, is different to the corpuses of other languages. There are things that aren't in there that are underrepresented. And this is really interesting if you're aware of it, and really dangerous if you're ignorant of it, if you mistake the data for truth, the map for the territory. And the last point I'd make is about philosophers. My ears prick up at people talking about knowledge and information. Many books have been written about this, and I haven't read most of them. ChatGPT has, so you might be better off asking LLM. But very broadly, I think it's a very, very important distinction, because knowledge is often defined as justified, true understandings of the world. And these are fundamentally properties of human minds. Yeah. And what this means is that we have to understand that to make technologies, statistical engines, AIs, resources powerful, we need to ask this question as to how they can empower people to understand the world and not be deceived, to become less deceived, to unearth patterns, to find patterns where none could be found before. We have this incredible opportunity to interrogate, to know, but we need frameworks, facilitation, expertise. There is a dichotomy between, on the one hand, and we see this in a lot of research around LLMs in education, on the one hand, like personal tutors, with questioning, with exploration, you can learn radically new things, gain radically new understanding. You can lift up entire cohorts of people. Educators will tell you the one intervention that gives you this massive improvement in any learner is one-to-one tuition. And LLMs can simulate that. They can play a part in that. But we also see very clearly that if people are, so to speak, outsourcing cognition and memory and understanding willy-nilly, if people are outsourcing their ethical selves, they're debating their critical selves, if they are just taking it as read, then their knowledge of the world as citizens, as participants in debate, as participants in a living culture is degraded. And I think, obviously, libraries are not the answer, but actually the skills that libraries have in their people, the archives they have, and also the values they embody about the public good and about a populace and a culture that knows itself well enough to debate in meaningful, reality-oriented terms what ought to be done, what can be done, what should be done. These very, very precious things need to be enshrined in the use and understanding of AI and the way that it is the interface between us and our culture and knowledge going forward.
Thank you very much, Tom. Well, this is fascinating, and I must say, perhaps a little spicier than I was expecting. I don't know about. I'm just quite interested in who's in the audience. Who in the audience would say they are or maybe have been a librarian? Quite a lot of people, okay. And who in the audience would say they are involved in technology, not necessarily AI, but technology data something broadly? Okay. Who in the audience is neither of those things? Good, excellent. I'm saying this because it's one of the great things about events here is that we get this mix. So just to slightly get an idea of what people's existing levels of expertise and interest might be. So there's a number of things that have come up, which I'm sure you will all pick up, but just to use my chair's privilege. There's a couple of things that I would like to pick up on, and maybe you might also like to respond to each other's points of view in this. And one of them, I think, is something that Tom has kind of made explicit, was implicit in a lot of what all of you have said, which is the role of libraries in the future. There seems to be a tension here between, if you like, the idea that libraries will continue to have a function very similar to the function that they have had in relation to culture, to making human knowledge accessible to people, to being a repository of information, and that AI will simply be a new way of doing that thing. Or the threat, perhaps, that libraries will be superseded by AI, and the idea that will we even need libraries when all human knowledge is 3 clicks away on the internet? Which, incidentally, the 3 clicks thing comes from a particular study they did at Stanford, where they got humans and machines to try and follow links on the internet, see how quickly they could get to something, which is a digression, but I think it's interesting that of all the bogus figures on the internet, the all human knowledge is 3 clicks away does actually have serious provenance in science. But and maybe to be a devil's advocate here a little, as a perpetual student, I use a lot of library resources, but more and more it's digital resources, and I use them from wherever I am, and I simply log on and do a search and find something in the digital world and read it. And yes, a library is technically my interface, partly just because that's how I have access to things like journals. But in terms of going into a library, even as a student, it's something I do less and less. I mean, is there an element here of hiding from the fact that for a lot of people, the function that a library would have had perhaps when we were all children, and that's a library was where you went to find things out, is being superseded by the internet and by AI? I mean, is that something that we just have to face up to, or are you going to come out throwing punches and say, no, you're wrong?
I think you're wrong.
Good.
So what I think is that the expertise of librarians is what's enabling you to do what you do. You know, I mean, it's hidden behind the interface. Librarians in the room, you need to make this much, much, much more evident. You should not let anyone onto your intranet, your web page, anything you do that's a digital tablet that you lend without saying, I was here. You know, because you buy it, the expertise in buying this stuff, in the health sector, you know, we are bringing together at the centre nationally vast quantities of material that have come through different domains, through different vendors. This is a highly technical job. And you're talking about the public library end, which is invaluable, and the academic end, but I'm also talking about the business end. In the public end, let's remember that we have a literacy rate, you know, something like, somebody in the room, tell me the literacy rate in English. Illiteracy, about 16%, isn't it? Now, about 16% of people don't have adult literacy. If I start to give you the figures on the ability to understand health information and operate and get online onto an e-consult, or understand health information, or have any chance of understanding the misinformation that is pouring out, sometimes with government support in some parts of the world, And, the figures for that are 43% of people struggle to understand health information, and if you add numbers, it's 61%. Librarians will be doing a lot of work for centuries to come, but the real challenge around the AI and the digital stuff is that people don't see that we're doing this work now, and we are not making it explicit. We're not making explicit enough the amazing work that you guys are doing in national libraries. We're not making explicit the work that we're doing backstage. We're far too humble. Get over ourselves and get up and talk about it.
Okay, we need a librarian visibility day, clearly. We all wear cardigans in solidarity.
No, we will not wear cardigans. The only person in the room wearing a cardigan is a broadcaster. My friend.
I'm going to be defenestrated. Who'd have thought? All the things
The
I've
defenestration
shared,
of the British Library.
Beaten to death by librarians with overdue slips, probably. All right, so, is there any dissent from this? Does anybody say, no, actually, we should be humble, maybe libraries are going to change the role, maybe AI will take over?
Changed. I mean, we could have had this conversation 20 years ago about Wikipedia. Like, now we've got Wikipedia, why do we need libraries? Before that, we've got the internet, why do we need libraries? Libraries aren't only about answers, and they're not only about a kind of quick fix. They're about experiences, they're about space, they're about contemplation, they're about knowledge. They're sometimes even just physically being around other people who are also thinking hard is a really important role that libraries had, or being in a space where you can ask for help applying for universal credit because someone else is also asking in a public library. They're spaces of community, they're spaces that we hold as having a value in society. They're making a stand as a third space, which is kind of getting away from the technology point. But I think that you have a seamless experience, that you don't end up with a computer full of viruses downloading random PDFs off the internet, is partly because libraries are curating those aspects. And even some of the shadow libraries that places like Meta use have an authority because some librarians and some rogue archivists are behind them. So even when librarians go to a darker site, they're still providing expert services in selecting and curating what we see. So I think the answers, the questions or the needs to which libraries are the answer changes over time, but libraries are always there.
Svein, you wanted to come in.
Especially national libraries, they have a significant role as memory institutions. And we have to have, it's widely accepted, and we have to have memory institutions, somebody to remember what we had. As those collections grow, I think they grow in importance as well, since they are significant memories of what has been. And it's what we see now is that those collections, they have even greater value now in machine learning. So libraries are important also for AI, for machine learning. If AI is going to be good enough. And just a comment on the change, the digital change. As I said, we started to digitize our collection seriously in 2006. And we have precise numbers on the use of our traditional library and the digital library. And we know that the digital library is now used 100 times more than the physical, and the use of the physical library has not changed.
Yeah.
It's still the same, but the digital is 100 times higher than the physical.
So it's expanding rather than replacing.
Yes, exactly.
Tom, you want to...
Yeah, I think this touches on something really interesting, which is partly about what people want and need and choose. I write textbooks and design courses and kind of guest lecture at lots of different universities and schools, and I also have sometimes the dubious pleasure of visiting them in conjunction with the people responsible for trying to sell my textbooks to universities and so on. And I do research around kind of pedagogy and so on and so on. And one thing that deeply surprises me is if you talk to universities, if you talk to faculties and so on, across the spectrum around the world, in my experience anyway, what are the differentiators? What do students want? If you're trying to be innovative, we want a 24-hour library. We want 24-hour access to a library. And why do you want this? Because I want to go there with my laptop, possibly to sit near a beanbag, and I want to be in that space. Why do you want to be in that space? Well, because, I'm overwhelmed with information. Because I want to go somewhere and work. I want to go somewhere where I have permission to be there as long as I need, where I can work in ways that I choose, where help is available if I need it, but where the space is itself part of my thinking and belonging. And I almost feel, without being too clever, we can flip the question. Rather than saying, well, we've got everything digitally. Like in the pandemic, we've got everything digitally. We proved we can work from home. Why are we here? Why are you in person in meet space? Why are you here? That's the wrong question. We look at the high street, we look at the world, and we notice that a lot of things are not working physically. A lot of businesses are struggling. People are shifting their buying habits. What's resilient? What do people want? They want to come together to drink coffee, to sit, to think, to share an atmosphere, to change how they feel. The high street basically consists 50% of rooms with coffee and laptops. Like, what's the most resilient physical activity of a digital age for a high street or a university? Sitting down somewhere with your laptop, doing some companionable thinking, being helped to access information, being helped to have a richer relationship with the digital world. And what helps us is not sitting at home on our own, especially if we're someone without a fast internet connection, without an espresso machine, all these other or more severe disadvantages. So I almost feel, without sort of being, I don't think it's facetious to say that there's an extraordinary resilience to these kind of co-present, knowledge-infused facilitative spaces. They're really resilient, and they speak to the ways that people handle an era of information overload is by using things like libraries and spaces to help them develop a meaningful relationship with information.
So, Rob, which is it? Is it espresso machines and laptops, or is it a memory institution?
It's all things. It's all of those things, I think. I mean, there's no doubt that these AI models have scaled exponentially over the last 18 months. But what hasn't scaled is those models' kind of common sense understanding of culture, context, history. So it's not just about applying the models, it's about bringing the expertise that we have as libraries to bring that common sense understanding, the cultural context. So it's not just enough to know things. These things are, you can find out facts, but it's about understanding and knowledge. And I think that's where libraries add that value. The technology is there to do a lot of things, but it's not just about technology. It's how you integrate them, how you help people use these tools and technologies as well. I mean, that's, some of Mia's work in the digital humanities space. It's not just using technology, it's using technology, but also bringing in those critical interpretive frameworks in practice to that technology, and that's the intersection where the real value is.
Do you want to say something briefly, Svein? I do want to come out to the audience, as people are raring to go, but if you've got a very short contribution, I'll take you first.
No, it will take too long.
Okay, all right. I'll come back to you. I will come back to you. So, people in the audience, remember that if you want to say something but you don't want it to go in the recording, just say, please edit me out of the recording. And there are people with microphones ready to go. So I'm afraid microphone people, the first hand I saw was right down the front here. So maximum distance from both of you. Who else would like to speak? And I'll try and get the microphone to the next person. There you go. There's one there. If you get the microphone to that person, I'll come to you second. Off you go.
Hi, Frode Hegland. I work on the future of text, also Norwegian, so it's nice to see you today. What Dr. Ridge said about thinking spaces made me very excited, because I live in Wimbledon. Why in the world did I bother come here today? It is partly to see you guys, but it's also to be in a place where people are thinking. That is a really huge thing. We can go to a coffee shop, and yes, I often work with a laptop, but it's not the same kind of environment. So what I may ask you guys, coming here to listen to you guys talk about AI, because you're humans, we listen in a different way, it's a different mode. it would be so amazing if this library and others provided AI coaching sessions, seminars, meetings. I mean, so many people come in just to listen to your wisdom on how to use an LLM. Even me, I develop software. Listening to you guys is great. So I just wanted to say thank you for providing the mental and physical space.
Well, lovely. What a lovely note to start on. Thank you. So somebody over there has the microphone. And who else would like to speak? Stick your hand up and we'll get the microphone to the next person. But off you go, meanwhile.
Thank you. Sarah Wingate-Gray, University College London, the Itinerant Poetry Library. I just wanted to pick up on Svein's comments about Norway, and I'm just wondering, actually, thinking about your 2014 revision of the Norwegian library law, which kind of placed, in my understanding, obviously, a sense much more of the dialogue and discussion at the centre of it. I'm wondering whether that perhaps gives us a sense of how the different shifts that I think came across between the kind of the UK and the Norwegian model and understanding in terms of the lack of that, let's say, in the UK. So the lack of attention from politicians in the UK to do with libraries. So, you know, called the Cinderella of the public services, and that's from the 1970s. That was a quote, and it's obviously got much worse since then, I would argue. So I'm wondering if that has something to do with the differences between the kind of international regions, and then similarly the kind of the well-known kind of sovereign wealth fund may be helpful in terms of funding the AI. And I don't want to pitch an AI library, an AI poll tax, but perhaps that is sitting there.
It's because you said that government is willing to pay. Everyone picked up their ears.
That's right. It's waves of envy in the room. And somebody else has the microphone. If you'd like to go for it, yeah.
Hi. My question was more along the lines of the data we feed into these AI machines. With libraries, you can curate data, you can create reliable data. But when it comes up with like going to newspapers, how reliable are the newspapers? If we put 100 years of the Daily Mail into the machine, we're going to get very different results as if we put 100 years of, I don't know, say the Independent or another newspaper. So do we have, or are we sort of starting to think about, get together a framework for how do we decide what data we trust? How do we decide what data is useful? And how do we sift through that data from absolutely everything that is out there?
Brilliant question, thank you. And picks up another thing that very much came at the beginning about trusted and trustworthy information and the role of libraries in that. So I'll come back to the panel now and let people have a crack, and then I will come back out again. And maybe, should we start with the Norway point? Because there's obviously like quite a lot of detailed information here, which not everyone in the room will have. So maybe you'd like to give us a quick recap of the particular things in Norway, apart from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which you made very wise use of your oil and gas industry, and arguably we haven't. But that's a different discussion for a different venue. But if you'd like to start us off with the Norway point, and then anything else you'd like to pick up on.
Of course, it helps to be to have money, but I think one good thing about our library is that we have had strong leadership for a while, visionary, strong top leaders with a good understanding of how to influence politicians. And we have used that, really. One other thing that we have used very much is to make good examples. So instead of going somewhere and asking for money to do something, just having a good idea, we have always showed a good example. This we have done without money. What if we had some money? And it's very convincing. Another thing is that, as you know, the Nordic countries are social. We have equality. We have another culture, which I think is a good starting point for this kind of processes. And it's hard to describe, but it is really different.
So we need oil and socialism, and then
Yeah, oil and socialism.
That's some
helps.
very unexpected conclusions from this event. For me. Oil and socialism.
Spend your oil money.
Is there anything else you wanted to pick up on?
Not really.
No, okay. So did you want to come back there?
yeah, I think actually picking up on something that Tom said as well as the question about newspapers, because living with machines used gazillions, a technical figure, of pages of newspapers. So it's something that we thought about a lot, and one of the reasons that we went into the project was wanting to use newspapers that we digitised with Find My Past. And one of the key questions that we went into was our knowledge of newspapers as sources not being what you might think they are, particularly newspapers in the earlier, late 18th, early 19th century, were privileged voices. At times, the economic models of newspapers changed, so they were taxed to untaxed. They weren't always available to the working person. Literacy levels changed how newspapers work. So they're really tricky as sources that also makes them endlessly fascinating. But thinking about the fact that often what people need to do is come in, they need to know that they need to talk to a librarian or a historian or someone about these sources, because whose voices have been excluded from newspapers traditionally? Women, immigrants, working class people, middle class people to a certain extent, the regions where you got daily newspapers, where you had newspapers that were only weekly and a couple of pages. Newspapers relied on subscriptions, but advertising a lot. So if you weren't in a market that could be advertised to, your voice is not likely represented. And then there's also the question of what's digitised. Sadly, we don't have oil or socialism, so we don't have everything digitised. And digitisation has been led by family history most recently. So it's name-rich newspapers that are digitised. And we've been able to quantify that to an extent through the Living with Machines project. But you need to know that if you're using that as a source, what's included, what's not included. And we know that there's methods like data sheets for data sets, which lets you talk about what was included, what was excluded, what was digitised. But I think we also maybe need to think about getting the models themselves to tell you about their biases, because we know that people are not, with the best will in the world, aren't going to ask as many experts about those data sources as they should. So having models that can, in conversation, say, we know that something happened in the warehouse and the entire decade is missing. We know that these voices were excluded. We know that this wasn't digitised because the paper quality was too poor. But working with the grain of the technologies that we have and how we know that humans behave, despite our kind of like the better angel that we should always be talking to librarians all the time, I think maybe one thing that libraries could do is adapt to put that information where people really actually are and not where we hope or wish that they would be.
So is there a problem, just to throw in a supplementary question, is there a problem with the tendency of a lot of current AI applications to gather information and kind of flatten it and summarise it, so you lose that kind of context, so that you might ask a question and the answer will say, oh, this event happened in 1889 in this place, but not actually, I mean, in the same way that in an academic work, you would have to have a citation that says, where did this information come from, so that the reader can judge for themselves what am I not being told, what's the context. Do AI models always have to do that flattening and stripping of context? Or is there a way that they can actually bring in that? You're desperate to come in, Rob. I hope you can answer this question.
I mean, it's something that we've worked on in terms of like looking at language changes, but you have to really work to make the models think diachronically. So think about time, think about how a word changed over from one decade to the other, because the models, they do flatten things. So the thing I always say about AI and libraries is we don't have the architectures that we need yet. So things like retrieval, augmented generation, RAG is better at getting you to the source of something, but it still doesn't necessarily understand that things have changed. But I'm looking at Sue because presumably in medical research, information is superseded all the time, and you need to know that came before that.
So there's not only the problem of this stuff hallucinating it or injecting something into it, it's just that it's out of date. I remember back in the old days, I remember withdrawing a book on first aid from someone, from a library. And the person next to me said, "Doesn't this work now?" And I said, "It never worked." This never worked. It was a burns treatment. It never worked. We just didn't know better. So in medical databases, you've got a chunk of material that's out of date, a chunk of material that's consensus and yet to be fully evidence-based. And then if you inject it with misinformation, you've got sheer... So we use something called the CRAP test, which is called currency reality. Any health librarians in the room? It's very good. Look it up. CRAAP. It was invented by one of the American universities. Can you remember it? But, timeliness, it's all that stuff. This conversation's really impressive, and the potential and the root and the needing of the architecture, but I'm much more worried about social media and the press. I'm watching the American news. Depending on whether I put on Fox or CNN, I've got two different truths for a start. So, teaching people media and information literacy is as much an issue here. And again, CILIP is part of MILA, the Media and Information Literacy Alliance. And how do we start with our small children to teach people that not everything they are told is true? And how do you make a judgment, and what is it you're looking at? The basics. Is this an advert? When I used to teach critical appraisal in general practice, I abandoned all the clever stuff. I would lay out 5 journals and things, and I'd say, which one do you think is just an advert? Which one has been reviewed by specialists who know their subject? These are the basics, and librarians teach that in universities, they teach it in health libraries, they teach it, I'm sure, in other specialist libraries, in schools, and increasingly in public libraries, because that's where you start with having any ability to manage AI as a civilization.
So, Rob, can AI actually help us with this?
I think one of the issues with large language models is the lack of transparency when things go wrong. So with hallucinations, it's very hard to then understand what's gone wrong in that system to work back. And that is a break from, the referential record-based system that knowledge has kind of been based on for a long time, especially libraries. We're based on individual references. It's very hard to unpick sometimes these models. They're black boxes at times, or they're based on algorithms that aren't transparent and understood. So I think about the newspaper point. It's just, if we are using models, we need to be transparent about what we're using, how they work. We need to document them. Yeah. And some of the pilots we've done around our moving image archive of large language models generating descriptive content, there's lots of skepticism with that moving image archive team. Because they have been in control of that descriptive content, they got to a point where they're like, actually, this could really, this could actually accelerate and actually focus our work on more important areas. But as long as, one, they're still in the loop before publication, and you're really clear when you're publishing content, what has been machine generated, and then what comes from humans. I think it's the Harvard Museum collection site at the moment says human-generated content, machine-generated content, and it will then unpick where that content has come from. So that transparency and that openness it has to be there, rather than just saying, we're going to give you this tool, or we're going to just give you this content to find.
I'd suggest that actually you've got to go way upstream to the research. It's research that's inherently biased, certainly in the field of healthcare. Huge amounts of it are inherently biased and has been historically. So there's a lot of work to be done in the production of research and in the writing up of those summaries to see how narrow it is. Much research is done between people of 18 and 60, 65. So those guidelines won't apply to children, they won't apply to adults. Most of the people in the studies are men, it may not apply to women. You know, I mean, this is really dodgy stuff. And I don't think, you know, in our discussions about curating it, I don't think we kick up enough to, you know, the National Institute of Healthcare Research, Turing, all the other bodies that pay for ESRC, whatever it is. You know, all these people who are paying for research need to have this stuff at the top of their minds. And they also need to have that in research outputs, if they have used AI, programming, machine learning stuff, they need to publish that as well, because otherwise none of this stuff is replicable. If you don't have, you know, you can't, if you're going to have computable knowledge as part of the way you create research, I went off and created this program or this algorithm, then you've got to share that as well, because it's not just applying it to the data, otherwise you can't repeat the research. And so research itself is being diluted.
So Tom, can technology help with any of this? Can it make research less biased, more transparent? Can it teach us how to critically assess what we are reading in context or viewing or having captioned?
I mean, so I think certainly technology can be a large part of it, because of course technology, you know, it's the medium through which we're swimming and accessing it. And I think one thing, the government's AI plan has come out with a lot of fanfare, and I'm always a little suspicious of a plan where the government just says, oh yeah, we'll do every recommendation. Yeah, great.
Tick.
But, you know, maybe people who've thought about something don't just go, oh yeah, that's all good. But I think there is this idea for a kind of national data depository. And I think if you look at, although it's not directly analogous, you know, the human biobank, genetic research, and so on, when you have real kind of gold standard data that research can be conducted upon very openly, when you have things like all trials protocols, when you have an obligation to publish your full data set, to publish in advance your hypotheses, to publish your code and so on, then you have an infrastructure for replication and checking, and you have a kind of an engine for innovation. I think one of the real difficulties is that people generally don't arrive at beliefs because they're shown information that an expert tells them is true. And it's lovely as a quote-unquote expert to think people should listen to you, but human beings form beliefs for all the old reasons. You know, reason itself as a faculty is probably more to do with having arguments and kind of defending your team than disinterestedly seeking truth. The disinterested pursuit of truth, whatever that may be, doesn't come very easily to us. But I think in the knowledge of that, there's lots of good things we can do. And I think just investing in this kind of public data sphere in transparency is a very powerful thing. And also this very basic requirement we might sometimes call a Turing flag, which is the idea that you need and deserve to know, as a matter really of kind of law and rights, whether the content you're interacting with or the entity you're interacting with is a human, an LLM, or some combination of the both. We can all be impersonated. There's enough video of this going out to have deepfakes, all of us, doing a panel where we're saying any old nonsense anyone wants to. Hannah Arendt gets quoted a lot these days, often misquoted, but she genuinely did say that the danger of, you know, the kind of I suppose information warfare really is not that people believe anything, it's that they believe nothing. It's that you degrade the AI. So anyone can say, well, that's fake news. I didn't say that, it's an AI fake and so on. So I haven't got some solution to this, but I think that there are lots of things we can do to try and provide the tools for those who want to help others arrive at better decisions and help the battle of ideas be well fought. It's very dangerous to be censorious as well. I'm not a tech bro, but I do think that I do think that anyone who wants to sort of arbitrate for politicized truth or speech for that matter has to think very, very carefully indeed about going down that road, because often I think the infrastructures for genuinely informed and referenced and factually rooted and reproducible debate are imperfect but better tools.
Very good. If you're watching this on YouTube, by the way, the recording, then this comes from the British Library, and therefore it's completely trustworthy. None of us are AI generated, and we all said what we said. The audience, I'm not so sure. I mean, they could be holograms for all I can see. All right, audience, we are galloping through the time, but I definitely want to make sure everyone who wants to say something or ask something gets a say. So do stick your hand up again. This is probably the last round I'm going to take. So if you're wondering whether to say something, now is the time to stick your hand up and say it. Don't be shy. There you are, there's a hand there. And again, if there's another hand somewhere, I'll get you lined up with the microphone. No, off you go.
So I work at the Ministry of Justice, and obviously a big problem with prisoners is that, you know, they have low levels of literacy, or often do, but also don't trust any institution, you know, even libraries or centres of learning. So I guess the question is, can you see AI kind of helping libraries or centres of learning engage with those who have low levels of literacy and low levels of trust, or do you see it making the situation worse?
That's a fantastic question. Other thoughts and questions? If anyone can answer that, that would be brilliant. Come on, librarians. Okay, they are. There's another hand there. I'm serious, by the way. This is your last chance, because you've seen how much the panel has to say. If you don't ask a question now, I'm just going to let them talk for the rest of the event. Off you go.
Just adding to the previous comment, you could add the question about children, especially growing up, because they're getting surrounded by information everywhere and getting used to using AI all the time in comparison to, say, the older generation where they would say not to use it. So linking back to your original point, how would you approach that, like with the prisoners who don't trust the system and the younger generation who are being brought up with AI surrounded around them?
Yeah, that's another very important question. That, I mean, in a sense, all of us are talking about a world we're used to being transformed. But if you're a child at school now, that is just the world. AI is the world. Okay, this is absolutely your last chance. Yes, okay. Norwegian Londoner at the front again.
I'm desperate not to talk again, but I do have a real question. So AI is amazing, but we're also entering the age of VR for the first time and only time in human history. In 10 years, nobody will not know what it's like to use a headset. It will just be normal. So for the rest of time, people will have access to completely visually immersive environments. So my question to you is, how might VR help us deal with AI? Could the multidimensional representation of information actually help us get past the talking to Siri or Alexa and getting a one-word or one-sentence answer? Or what do you think? This is the research we're working on, so I would love to get some cheat sheet answers from you guys.
Right, free consultancy for the gentleman down the front. Okay. Anybody else? Last chance. No, you just want to go to the bar, don't you? Okay, right. So, panel, what I'm going to say is, can you respond to these questions, which are all brilliant questions, but also if you can roll in these are my final remarks. And we have 10 minutes left, so you've got a couple of minutes each, but I will stretch that. Let's make it 15 minutes. I think we can go with 15 minutes. So you've got 3 minutes each to answer all those questions and give us your closing on everything. And I'm just going to come along in order from that end to this end.
Well, I think the bad news is that AI can't solve problems that humans can't solve themselves at the moment. It can scale up things like human attention. And I know Nick Poole, who was previously with CILIP, was passionate about books in prisons and libraries in prisons, and saw them as a really important service that people should have access to because they can be life-changing and they can keep people sane and they can do so many important things. There's a kind of, in thinking about can AI solve the problem that I currently have, some of it is about saying, can I actually identify my problem, and if I describe success, is technology involved in that in any way? So probably what we need is like better healthcare, better mental health care, and support for people in prisons to think about how we can change their lives and change their circumstances and actually give people the human dignity of being listened to. We could have them talk to chatbots, and that probably has some validity because even in the 1960s, ELIZA was a really basic chatbot that just kind of reflected back to what you were saying, but that people found it therapeutic and helpful. But the kids one I'm going to stay away from because I don't know what to say to kids about how we deal with this, except that kids are fantastic at understanding the world. And if we can find the metaphors that help them understand what AI is, but also how they can deal with the challenges of a world that is inflicted by AI. But I think the VR question is really interesting because a lot of these technologies don't have a kind of native, they don't have the affordances that tell you how to use them. Like a book is an amazing technology. This is a codex. You turn the pages, material is revealed to you. You can shut it, you can put it away, you can carry it around. What you can do with it is really apparent. And then we learn additional things like you can write in the margins and do things. With VR and Siri, they don't have those ways of telling you what you can do with them. But actually, I'm quite short-sighted and I can't use headsets because they don't work on someone who can't see. So I'm waiting for someone to address that kind of accessibility need before I can think too much about VR and AR.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting watching I've got a teenage son. He's on his phone a lot, more than I'd like him to be. But, he is learning to negotiate and, friendships, information literacy. He's doing that. It's an important part of how we negotiate in the modern world about how we interface with these different things. Information literacy and trusting or verifying what we're seeing is true is a huge part of that, and there's a big part to play in information literacy. I totally agree with that. There's so much information out there. There's always that allure that a magic AI tool will just give you the information you need. It will be that filter, but it's never just that. You need to push people to go deeper and investigate, to move from that kind of facts back to knowledge and critical thinking. The prison question is really interesting. National Library of Scotland have run a programme in prisons, so a lot of our content is, because it's legal deposit content, you have to be on site to access that content. We are looking, again, we did this before the pandemic, of actually enabling access in prisons to all of that content, so you didn't have to obviously come to the National Library of Scotland. So that's something we're definitely looking at, and there's definitely a role to play of libraries in museums, but not just access to content, it needs to be literacies as well. I'm going to see to my 15-year-old son on the VR headsets. He's got a VR headset, he loves it, and I think you might be optimistic on your 10-year horizon, but it's interesting to think about how culture will accommodate that way of thinking and seeing the world. I don't have answers for you on that, but yeah, it's a space to look at.
Thank you. Svein.
Yeah, I think, well, there are some practical answers to many questions, but I think to some extent it goes down to philosophy. For example, what is trust, and what can we trust? And I had a presentation here at the British Library today, and I told the audience that I'm a pessimist on this era of AI. And the main reason is that AI is so good at producing information and maybe knowledge that we cannot trust. And I wonder what that is going to do with us all. Is it going to change our society? Is it going to destroy something that we need in our kind of society, in democracies? And I'm afraid that it may be the case. And in that sense, I think the library, if we go back to the library, has a role because we can be trusted.
It strikes me, just to chip in, that trust is also a two-way relationship. That one of the things that happens with, for example, a library is that we trust that the librarian will direct us towards reliable information, but also might give us the context, might say, oh, you're interested in researching racism. Here we have a collection of racist books so that you can understand the ideas. And that's a two-way trust, because we trust them to point us towards trustworthy information, but also we are trusted to exercise our critical faculties and put things in context and say, oh, right, well, this is a book by a racist, so I'm going to read it in that context. If I pick up an old newspaper, I'm not just going to assume that everything in it is literally true and so on. Sure. But obviously an AI can't trust us, so we don't have that two-way.
That's interesting.
Thanks. Anyway, that was me just chipping in.
So quickly on trust, there's an annual veracity index, and librarians are usually the second or the third. We're currently third. Nurses come first, and I'm okay with the next one. Pilots are next. That's fine by me. And then librarians. But I mean, it is an evidence-based observation that librarians are trusted. To come to the prisons, actually my thinking went very similarly towards Mia. I mean, some of the work we did around what's called the TOPOL review, TOPOL, in healthcare, we did a separate report. There were so many applications for mental health. We did a separate report for mental health done by a guy called Tom Foley. And there are a number of people who, in distress, find it much easier to talk to an AI machine, a robot, through the early stages. And I suspect that this might apply to some of our people in prison. There also must be ways that we can use immersive experience to help them stay connected with their families. There must be ways that we could be crossing that bridge by bringing those texts together. I do chair something called the Health and Digital Literacy Partnership. Prisoners, as you all know, one of their, I think it might be their only right, is to have access to a library. And so there is much work that librarians can do in communities. Schools, I think, is a really big challenge, and I think it's a societal challenge. I'm about to become a grandmother, so this is very live for me. I think all the talk about digital natives back in the day was rubbish. I don't think people transferred their digital skills to their learning or to their work. You know, people would sit and be playing with Snapchat or wherever it was in one place, but they still came to the library and had no idea how to search a database. So I don't think people will pick it up automatically. I think critical thinking should not be reserved for the brightest and the best who go to our best universities. I think it should be for everyone. And we should get really, really ashamed of ourselves as a society that our literacy rates are so low. VR, my eldest son is 36. He designed a VR library, virtual library, using virtual reality for his master's in architecture. When he handed it in, you know, with the QR code on, the tutor actually didn't recognise what it was and says, "You don't seem to have been doing very much for the last 2 years." This is a tragic story. It is tragic, and I think if my son hadn't said, "Did you use the QR code?" he wouldn't have seen what an amazing piece of work he built this VR museum. I think immersive technology has an enormous amount to offer. It's got a great deal to offer in healthcare with pain relief, amongst other things. And will take many of us on holidays, I hope. So I'm going to leave with a quotation. I'm optimistic that humans can step up to the challenge. I hope that librarians will, but many people who know me will know I don't believe hope is a strategy. So I'm entreating librarians to step up to the challenge because I think we can improve people's lives with this tech like any other. But I'm going to quote Edward O. Wilson. The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology.
Well, follow that.
Yes, you get the last word, Tom.
Sorry.
So if you'd like to sum up the entire evening.
It's a wonderful line.
Technologically and philosophically.
I think I'll just do that then. So, I mean, I suppose I'd declare a slight interest in that I'm co-founder of a project developing a sort of critical thinking, cognitive co-pilot AI. And the joy of that is that I write textbooks and design work a lot around critical thinking. Thanks to AI, I've got a fully working prototype we're testing in universities with students, after a few months. And what comes for free virtually with it is the ability to do it in any language, and for those who are visually impaired, because we can also do it in speech. So we can test it in 4 languages, including with people who are not just sort of fully able-bodied. And when I think about prisons and so on, I think the democratization that the AI layer proposes is so radical it's hard to get your head around. And it also takes stuff that was the province, if you like, of the elite, that signaled education or specialness, like using technical scientific vocabulary or coding or getting images, and it puts it in anyone's hands. And when I'm dealing with people from all sorts of backgrounds with this, I talk to people who say, I'm not very good at writing email. My car was in at the garage, and I got ChatGPT to write me a letter, to read all the emails from my garage and send the letter setting out my legal rights, and now they've fixed the car. But of course, the next step in that is that the garage has all the emails read by another fine-tuned AI, and it just becomes an argument between 2 LLMs. You have the agent on your behalf, just like in universities sometimes you rather feel it's AIs writing essays which will then be marked by other AIs, and students and tutors are sitting there going, well, this is a bit silly. So it's really, really, really big, and I would be lying, I think, if we even know what the impact of this vast democratization will be. It makes many things more accessible, and that should be empowering. If you are not that confident reading or writing words, there is something that will talk to you and write perfect words for you. It can generate you a scientific paper if you want. Unfortunately, it makes it very, very easy to generate rubbish and very hard to detect it. AI is asymmetrical. I can generate endless essays. There is no reliable detection mechanism to note that I've done that. It doesn't exist. And the ones that do exist are often covertly biased or unreliable. So I will leave with a thought, which is that we're entering an age when almost any question can instantly and convincingly be answered. But what that puts an enormous onus on is us as teachers, as thinkers, as citizens, to try and make sure that we're asking questions that are actually worth answering in the first place. And that's an enormous structural challenge, but a very hopeful one, I think. Because if you're in a classroom, if you're dealing with kids of all kind of backgrounds, whatever, it can be magical to get them playing with an AI, as long as that's not the point. As long as the point is that they're using it to code up an interactive map of their hometown, to make a video game, to construct a persona, to have a conversation about a scientific paper that they fed in and turned to a toy model, all of which I've done with kids of all different backgrounds in their early teens and so on. The opportunity is so boggling and huge that really all you can do is go and play with it and try not to lose sight of this, the critically reflective process that either does or doesn't make it worth doing in the first place.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you to the whole of the fantastic panel.